Hello everyone, my name is Ben and welcome back to PASSTHEauxCORD, a channel where I really miss Juice WRLD. And before we get started here, I want to address just a couple things. I realize I just recently said that unless there's two really interesting albums that come out in a week, I'm only going to cover one every week. And Gex is one of my favorite bands out there right now, so I really wanted to do a review on that, but this has such a high level of importance in the music industry that I really want to get my 6 cents out here on this album as well. And my mic is currently taped to my desk because I'm a clumsy idiot who broke the stand yesterday. So if there's any inconsistency in my voice during this review, that'll just about do it, I suppose. But with all that being said, today we're going to be looking at the posthumous album release from rapper and singer-songwriter Juice WRLD called Legends Never Die. I want to start off by saying, rest in peace, Juice WRLD. He seemed like a really genuine and caring guy that was taken from us way too soon. Anyone can see that he had massive potential, and even what he achieved in his tragically short life is pretty incredible. While not even still being with us, he holds such a huge level of influence in the rap game. He was easily one of the most influential and important names out there and has inspired so many people. I was very saddened by his passing last year, just as I was getting excited for his next album. We truly lost someone great to a prominent and still growing problem. I just went into detail when I was talking about Pop Smoke's new album with my issues with posthumous albums, especially after the album rollouts that we saw of X. There were 3 collections of very loose demos that they tried to pose as finished ideas, but clearly the only thing going for it here was that these can be now streamed millions of times to put lots of money into people's pockets, and that seems to be the unfortunately malice intents of a lot of posthumous releases. That's not to say that it's never been done tastefully. I think that for the most part, Lil Peep's stuff was handled decently, like okay at least, and I think that Mac Miller's posthumous album was handled with a very high level of care, and that turned out to be something really great. So I went into this before hearing anything else. Of course, I had high hopes. The intentions seem to be at least half-heartedly decent here, as some of the profits for the merch and the album itself are going to charity, and some of the singles leading up to this seemed respectable and didn't feel like some sort of stitched up disaster. Even with the donations, you have to keep in mind that this album is going to make millions. This is already checking out to be the top of the charts for the next couple weeks here, so don't go thinking that I give it a pass entirely just because there's some charitable donations associated with it. The features here were a good indication for me though too, as everyone on here he has worked with before, and most of them he was even close with. But then you see that cursed 21 track number and things start to go downhill. I really hate looking at things like that on both this album and the Pop Smoke album, because the reasons for having a huge number of songs on your album is so obvious at this point. And then there's the fact that Jared's then girlfriend has come out and confirmed the release of more albums later on, making me even more suspicious. I really tried to keep an open mind going into this, but it all just looked so grim going into it that it was difficult to not have blemished intentions when listening to this. We open on the track Anxiety here, which seems really badly titled, because in this interview snippet, he seems to be talking about a lot of other things besides anxiety and only briefly mentions it. This is the first of quite a few voice memo clips that are part of a format that feels way too familiar, but does provide a good message for the younger people looking for inspiration, undoubtedly. The 4 following songs are promising, but they're also probably the best of the bunch. Conversations does add to the use of the title Anxiety, as much of the track deals in it. It's a synthetic sounding minimal song that I definitely call decent and has some catchy flows on it. Here already in the album, it's so sad to hear the hopeless nature of it all, which is something that really got to me all throughout here. The first song is the start of kind of a vicious cycle. Not to be negative about the song that I did enjoy on here, but Ronnie J's producer tag really has to be the first thing I have to hear on this Dead Man's album, huh? Is it really worth that much to advertise like that? As time goes on, I really respect Ronnie J less and less because his beats keep getting more stale and seem like less effort is put into them, and this isn't helping at all with that. Titanic is probably my favorite song on here. The hook is really catchy, and it actually just feels like the better days when Juice would drop a banger and we could all be playing that shit non-stop. This one really hits for me, I have to say. Bad Energy, once again, has a really strong hook on here, and I like the positive message this one serves up lyrically. Production is fine, even if it is starting to show its flaws already this early on the album, though. Righteous is what I'd call one of the most heartbreaking songs on here, and it really works for me just like it did when it dropped. This gives me that feeling that I think all of us had when Good News was released by Mac Miller posthumously. I still really appreciate the care that I feel was put into this one, and this also has one of the most gut-wrenching set of lyrics on this whole album, where he mentions drug abuse and addiction. Blood on My Jeans is a song that a lot of people seem to like, and I guess I just don't get it. I think that this is a really poorly written song that definitely could have went back to the drawing board for sure. There's just some lyrics on here that I don't really think should have seen the light of day, and the fact that he's not around to perfect stuff just makes me feel like don't release anything that doesn't seem perfected. I have to imagine someone somewhere along the way just thought that some of the deliveries at the very least of these lines is really awkward. Like I said, this point going forward is pretty unmemorable, with Hate the Other Side being pretty much the only other song I feel stands out as very likable at all. Polo and Leroy do really good on their verses. Like I said, props to having former collaborators who at least appeared to be his actual friends hop on here instead of a random unassociated vocalist. Marshmello's bombastic and poppy production doesn't do a lot to help this one or come and go after it. To be honest though, he's pretty much if Imagine Dragons were a producer at this point, and just turns everything into this loud washed up mess. I'd be a lot more upset by it if they hadn't worked together in the past, but I'd still rather we just stayed with some more stripped back stuff. Like, dude, I understand you're trying to turn this funeral into a rave, but can we just keep it down a little bit? I have very similar feelings to the track with Halsey on here. This reminds me a lot of their last collaboration, which I kind of saw as a pretty drab big name track made for the charts, and that's how I feel about this one too. And the song with Trippie Redd once again feels like a similar thing here. I already mentioned a lot of my grievances with this track when I reviewed it individually in one of the recaps, but to my knowledge this did exist when Jared was alive, but I don't know to what capacity. Either way, it seems really dull and for whatever reason off rhythm to my ears. I just can't get into the production or the performances either. And pretty much everything not already mentioned unfortunately feels like filler to a really high degree. I didn't want it to so much. I wanted to believe that every song on here was going to be at that same level with Righteous, but cold hard fact here is that most of them are Juice WRLD flavored white noise. And unfortunately, most of that comes from the glamorized, expensive sounding production. I can't help but to feel like most of these instrumentals are just way too clean and way more radio friendly than originally intended. One word that I've seen this album get criticized for is underwhelming, and I have to say I 110% agree with that sentiment, as most of this just is really underwhelming. There is unfortunately so little to latch onto here outside of those highlights that I already mentioned. Most of the emotional appeal can be read from these rather than heard from them. The utter hopelessness of it all. What he says in these songs is so sad to hear. The incredibly prophetic nature of the song called Can't Die is so depressing after his passing. It just hurts knowing that it's too late and we can't get him that help that he so clearly needed. And the bigger issue is I don't even know who to direct my frustrations at with this. I mean this with all due respect and have no malice in saying that I didn't think Death Race for Love was very good. Ring Ring, Hear Me Calling, Robbery, still amazing songs, and those ones come to mind when I think of the album, but the rest, pretty forgettable. Less so than this, sure, but that album was really densely packed with filler. He even went on to brag about the fact that he finished that whole very long album in the matter of 2 weeks. Could have Legends Never Die been most of Juice WRLD's intended results? Yeah, totally. I like to believe it's not, because it's so underwhelming, but it really could have been what he meant to release. But one thing is very clear and obvious. These vocal snippet interludes were not his doing. I said before, I do believe that these could be used as a great form of positive messaging to his especially younger fan base, but I also feel extremely pandered to every time these tracks come up. The level of incessant flattery on the Man, the Myth, the Legend interlude is kind of sickening, not because I don't think his freestyle skills were good or shouldn't be praised, but because no one in the world can convince me that this would have ended up on a Juice WRLD project while he was alive. It feels like emotional manipulation to have me hear all these admittedly really great words coming from Jared on these interludes when it wasn't him who put them here at all. And with the last song on here being Man of the Year, it really feels even more like that manipulation. These lyrics could have been taken back to the drawing board once again if he was here to do so, and probably shouldn't have been used for that reason. I know My Lyrics Saved You is not the send-off I feel would do him justice. That really feels pretentious, even though it's supposed to be a moment of finality and closure. Were his intentions with these lyrics good? Yeah, it's clear what he's saying, but it still feels really pretentious. And I feel like if he knew he had to make his last song, he would make something so much more humble than this. And the worst part about this is we're getting more Juice WRLD music after this, so they can do what? Rip open the wound of all of the fans who were hurt by his passing for a couple extra bucks? More than likely, yes. My one glimmer of hope is that this was his last album needed to fulfill the contract with Interscope Records, and I'm hoping that family and friends of Jared put together something that feels much less commercial and much more in the way of having good intentions, I guess. It's so hard to listen to this album and feel like most of these tracks probably wouldn't have even came out. A lot of songs are scrapped for every album cycle. That's just how it goes. And it seems like most of these would have gotten the chopping block before this was put out. I don't even really feel like rating this, but I guess I have to muster up my motivation to do the outro now. So let me know what you thought of this album down in the comment section.